Harrison. Hi,
Hello,
Harrison.
Ricardo. How are you?
Very good, and you?
Doing well.
Fantastic. Well, I'm very happy to have you here. You're one of Ritzy's editors, and I've been wanting to interview you for a while. So you say on your Ritzy profile that you're the world's most thorough content editor. So did you start as a content editor or as maybe a copy editor or proofreader and then move to content editing as it's the case with many Ritzy editors?
Well, at the time I started, I didn't know the distinctions yet. Certainly when I was in high school and in college, I was doing copy editing for, for literary magazines, newspapers, what have you. But when I started working in publishing, my boss, the publisher, he didn't tell me to copy edit specifically or to do content editing specifically. He gave me a manuscript and told me to edit it, and for me that inherently involved both the service, both the copy and the spelling, grammar, that sort of thing, and also the content of what I was reading and anything I could provide that any way I could improve that. So really from the very first summer I began in publishing, which was the summer of 2005. I've been doing content or developmental editing. It just took some time before I knew the formal term to be ascribed to it.
Got it, got it. And so when an author approaches you for an edit, how do you work with them? Do you prefer authors coming to you with a finished first draft or a more polished manuscript?
Generally, I do like to work with a finished draft. That makes it a lot easier to provide overall feedback, especially when it comes to to the greater overall story issues, story arc, character arc, climax, etc. But as far as how polished that first draft needs to be, I feel like I can be very useful anytime from the first draft on. And personally, I like going through the entire developmental edit process and being able to provide that feedback relatively early, if not right after the first draft, so that the author is able to know what they need to do, and have that plan of attack for the next draft as early as possible. Hopefully, get them into a much better position, and much more knowledgeable position from which to attack that next draft.
And so if you start working on with the author in the first draft, generally how long does it take for you and the author in collaboration to get to a finished manuscript?
Well, it depends a lot on the context and how long I'm staying with a project. When I was in traditional publishing, I would be with a project from start to finish, and I'd be doing thorough developmental feedback every time. And depending on the state of the manuscript when I started with it, that could be a process lasting anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, because we wanted to make sure that the books we put out were as strong as they could possibly be. On the freelance side, it depends a lot more on the author, their own direction, and whether or not they want to keep hiring me after,
Yeah.
which has a lot more to do with the financial realities than anything else. But I love to stick with projects when I can and to work with projects through to the end. Oftentimes, I will do a developmental edit to start with, and then a smaller consultation or review after. We call them manuscript consultations and manuscript evaluations. Of course, everybody has their own name for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I suppose if I look at when books happen to be published relative to when I worked on them, it still ends up being probably more than a year. Depends on the author, but I am seeing. I went back recently to look at the books that have come out from that I had edited in their on a freelance level versus my years in traditional publishing. There have been a lot of those to come out recently, and always wonderful to see. Usually takes a year or more, but really comes down to how quickly the author works and how effectively and what they want from me after.
Of course, it makes sense. Do you think like as you've worked before in traditional publishing and are now freelance, do you feel like working with self-publishing authors gives you maybe more freedom, or like do you, when you like maybe the structure behind of a publisher, is it harder to handle the relationship with authors? Do you need maybe more psychology? What are the differences really, if there are some?
The differences for me are not necessarily that vast. Well, the difference is for me as far as what I get to do for a living is I get to focus entirely on the editing, which is one of the reasons I chose to go freelance. But as far as the authors, I work with authors who plan to self-publish. I work with authors who plan to start contacting publishers after they're finished working with me. And in either case, the goal is the same. The goal is to figure out, what's working, what's not working, why exactly it isn't working, and how specifically we can make it better. The goal is always to create the very best version of the author's manuscript. One could make the argument that in the case of someone pursuing traditional publishing, the focus could be more on marketing it to publishers, but while I always am happy to give feedback on that, for me it doesn't matter as far as the story itself. As far as the story itself, it's about the quality. It's about creating the very, very best version, and that's the same whether it's traditional or self-publishing. And I don't think it's changed the relationship with my authors either, in that in any case I always want to be available to them for any concerns they have, and that was always the case when I was with traditional publishing, and it remains the case here. I suppose you mentioned the psychology, and I suppose that there's a difference there in that when you're working with the publisher, there's part of the goal, and this is one of the first things I learned when I started editing. One of the goals is to make you want the author to want to make the changes you suggest. So just providing a litany of criticisms, without explanation how it can be improved, and B, without encouragement, turns out to be counterproductive. But honestly, it's the same way with self-published authors, because that's the whole point. The whole reason that I'm here and the whole reason they're working with me is because they want to get to another level and they're not there yet. I want to be as straightforward as possible and as clear as possible about all the issues that they need to work with, but if I'm not also being helpful and encouraging enough to get them where they want to be, then that works out for nobody, and I'm not doing my job.
Definitely. I like your point about like in both cases it's all about getting the quality of the writing as high as possible through
Absolutely.
get it. So I think maybe some books according to the genre or their target audience maybe more suited for self-publishing than traditional publishing if they have a limited market maybe. Do you advise authors on the publishing path they should choose based on their manuscript, or do you try to adapt their writing and their manuscript and the story to the publishing path they've decided?
Well, I definitely advise, but I don't recommend necessarily, at least as far as the path for publishing, because every every author has their own approach, and my job is fundamentally to help them achieve their goals. Of course, if I see an issue with those goals or something that could make things easier, I will certainly let them know that. But traditional publishing and self-publishing both have their pros and cons, and I don't think of genre as one of them necessarily, one of the distinguishing characteristics. I mean, you're certainly right that some genres are easier to catch on more easily in self-publishing, perhaps, than others do. And that can certainly factor into the advice I will give if asked, but it doesn't affect what I do as far as editing. Um, and primarily, if an author wants to pursue traditional publishing or self-publishing, they have their own reasons. As long as those bear out, as long as as that makes sense for them and who they are as authors, because some are more suited to one than the other. then that's what I want to be able to support, and that's what I want, and I want to be able to advise them in that direction as best I can. Fortunately, my experience is such that I can advise effectively, no matter which direction they choose.
No, and I think that's important too because a lot of authors count on their editor actually for that, especially if they're starting authors and don't especially know the publishing landscape and
Right.
the competitive landscape.
Yeah, which is confusing as hell, even for those of us who have been there for a decade.
I know, I know. I'm starting to feel it. No. I've seen this curious idea among many indie authors that like they've had to try a lot of editors before finding the right one, that it's almost like dating or marriage. Do you think there's like one ideal editor for every author out there, like a soulmate, or?
I don't know. I certainly wouldn't go that far. I think there are certainly cases where a particular editor's personality or approach would work for a particular author. That is no doubt true. But there are also there's also a lot of disparity in quality of editors, frankly, and it's hard to know where to go to find one who is genuinely effective and is genuinely going to be helpful for the author. So a lot of the time, it's not so much searching for the one that fits than going through a lot of people who aren't necessarily fantastic at it before finding somebody who is. At the this is going to make me sound a bit egotistical, and hopefully not so much. But I certainly like to believe that I am the best editor for most clients, because I happen to think I'm very good at what I do, and I imagine most other editors feel that way as well. Um, but it fundamentally comes down to being as effective as you can possibly be. And I think that's more important than having a particular chemistry with the author you happen to be working with.
No, I think I agree in the fact that there's a lot of. I agree with the point on the disparity of quality among like editing and even design services for authors out there, and which is part of the reason why I started the company I
Yeah,
started.
exactly. The part of the reason for that, or so it seems to me, is that a lot of people assume that they can edit,
Yeah.
and whether it's copy editing or developmental editing, and they assume that because a lot of people, most people, as is the case with any kind, any skill or trade really, don't know fully what goes into it, and some have a knack, and some will develop, and some will become amazing, and that's exciting to see. But a lot of people are, they they love to read and they love thinking about books, and they want to be helpful. They want to be able to pursue that, and that's great. But there's a lot more to it than that, and it can be, and that's what makes it so hard for the writers as well, because they have no way of knowing if the person they're talking with is somebody who is really going to be able to help them, or somebody who is enthusiastic and really believes they're going to be able to help them. So that's why I too am really love what Reedsy is going for, because it helps authors navigate that and find editors who genuinely have the background and the ability to bring out the best in the work of whatever author should come upon them.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Another thing I found very interesting in your career is that you self-published a book yourself recently, right?
Well, it wasn't self-published. It came out through Bancroft Press in 2012.
Got it. And do you think like what pushed you to put a book out there yourself? You were a screenwriter before, and did editing, working as an editor on a lot of books, made you want to put your own work out there?
Well, actually, in a way, just the opposite. The listeners started out as a series of short stories my last semester of college. And actually, I started during the same summer of 2005 that I started the internship that would eventually become my publishing career. So that was a very busy summer, clearly. Um, and so so I started those things more or less simultaneously. And of course, I'd always been writing. I've been writing since kindergarten. But this particular story, there's a series of short stories, and then developed into a screenplay. And that screenplay was optioned for film, and ultimately the publisher I worked for um, expressed an interest in a novel version of that screenplay, and so I wrote that. But for a while, my experience in publishing actually made me not want to put the book out there because I knew the marketing challenges that were ahead, and I knew that I would have to be out there front and center trying to build audience, doing book signings, doing interviews, all things that I know how to do and that I know to recommend to authors, but things that I do not have a particular knack for myself. I know a lot about marketing because I worked at a small press, and if you work at a small press, you learn everything. But I'm not a great marketer or self-promoter. It's not my nature. Um, so for a while, I was content to have written this book and wasn't going to put it out there. Fortunately, I had enough smart people around me to tell me I was being an idiot, and that I should pursue publishing, and I did, and the book was out, and I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had since then because of that. So it's not so much, yes, an experience informed by my publishing background, but in a lot of different ways over a long period of time.
I see. No, it's really interesting. Well, I'd like to finish with an easy question. If you had like one recommendation for 2015 for authors, whether they're traditionally published, indie published, or hybrid out there, what would it be?
Um, I suppose it would be. I mean, the 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 real self-serving answer is to hire me. Um,
Exactly.
but more broadly and less egocentrically than that. The thing that divides a writer from an author in my mind is the revision process, is pushing forward, is doing everything that is within your power to create the very best version of your story. It's not something that authors should shortchange or try to get around if they believe in what they've written, if they really want it to be everything they imagine it could be. And there's nothing more spectacular than taking an idea not only from concept to first draft, but from first draft to final draft, and ideally the very best version of that wonderful draft. So I suppose the advice would be to follow that road to the end. No, not stop partway through. And I suppose that's the same advice in 2015 as it would be in 2016 as it was in 2014. But it's always wonderful to see authors make that journey.
I agree, and I certainly second that advice. Thank you very much for your time, Harrison. It was great.
Thank you for having me.
It was great to learn your experience and what a content editor can do for an author.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.